Hello, International Video Game Hall of Fame. Reggie here. Thank you for honoring me with the prestigious Walter Day Lifetime Achievement Award. To be honored in this way and to be associated with Walter himself and with past recipients of this award, Steve Wozniak, David Crane, David Bishop, to name just a few, it really, truly is humbling. It's also wonderful to be recognized in a year when so much Nintendo content is also being recognized. That makes it a special thrill for me. I also want to thank the person who made some introductory comments on my behalf earlier this evening, Isaiah Triforce Johnson. Triforce and I met back in 2004 at E3, and then I saw him again later on that year when I presented him the very first Nintendo DS sold in the Americas. And it was my privilege to see Triforce at other E3s, as well as whenever Nintendo introduced a new system or a critical new game, because Triforce would always be first in line, and I would be the one presenting him his new purchase. Triforce, thank you for being such a force in the industry and such a force in putting my name forward for this prestigious award. Thank you so much. Lastly, I want to thank the players and the fans. Like you, I have a passion for video games, and I was a fan before I was ever an employee of Nintendo. And I think that knowledge of video games, I think the knowledge of all of these great franchises, the ability to poke fun at myself to create all of those wonderful memes, I think that is what endeared me with the community. And I do believe that the love of the community is a large part of why I'm able to receive this award. Thank you. For all of you there in person, all of you watching this on video, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate being recognized this way. Thank you, and have a great evening.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the PixelCast. I am Jeremy Alessi, the founder of PixelFest, and of course our mission is growing through love of games. And perhaps there are few people who have grown as much through games as Reggie Fils-Aime. As you saw in that opening video, he was just inducted into the International Hall of Fame, Video Game Hall of Fame, and was given a Lifetime Achievement Award. There's probably few people who deserve it more. I remember seeing Reggie speak at his first E3, which I think was 2004 or 5, and of course he was captivating right away. I didn't know who he was. I was like, who is this guy? And had been following him ever since, and of course many gamers love Reggie. And as he said in the video, of course, he is a true fan, which is why all of his work was, I think, always so genuine and meaningful to the rest of us gamers. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit more to Reggie and the award and the induction in the news. What I want to do now is continue celebrating Halloween with Castlevania IV. As you can see, I am just a floating head this week, still celebrating Castlevania IV, and I wanted to start diving into the Let's Get Techy with it that I spoke about last episode. So, what we have, and let me see here. Let me see. So now in the upper left and right corners, you can see the original spinning barrel or spinning cylinder scene from Super Castlevania IV, and you can see a Unity window that's running. That's running real time right now in the background. So this is my first prototype of this scene, which has captivated me since 1992 when I got the game. Now, before we begin, I just have to put this out there. This game was not polygonal. We did not have 3D graphic capabilities or truly 3D graphic capabilities on the Super Nintendo at this point in time. What is going on right there in Super Castlevania IV is there is per pixel manipulation going on of that image or texture, and it is being basically deformed in real time, but not using polygons. So we didn't get polygons on the Super Nintendo really until the Super FX chip. And of course, as a 2D example, Yoshi's Island does a great job of doing some of these effects better and faster. You can see there's some frame rate dip in Super Castlevania IV there because it used the Super FX chip. But to me, this is almost more mind-blowing because it didn't use that. This is just using the Super Nintendo's Mode 7, and I think this might have been the only time I saw somebody use it to create such a 3D effect, you know. And one thing that I also have to speak to is that when I was setting up my demo, it didn't look nearly as cool until I added some platforms in the foreground. So by adding those platforms in the foreground and showing off a little bit of parallax at the same time as the rotation, that's really what gives the scene its depth. And you know, that's something that I wouldn't have found out until later if I hadn't created this quick prototype. But I have to admit, I cheated. What I did to set up my scene is I imported ProBuilder from the Unity Asset Store. If you don't know, ProBuilder started out as a tool built, I think, just by an indie to do 3D modeling inside of Unity. And so it was something that you could purchase for $100 or maybe it was $150. We used it to create all of SwapFire's single player maps on our Wii U game SwapFire. We also created some of the multiplayer maps with it, although some of the multiplayer maps were created using 3D Studio Max, and various tools went into the creation of that. But ProBuilder was certainly one of the tools that helped us out a lot. So I used ProBuilder and I instantiated a cylinder, and then I flipped its normals so that the cylinder is actually, the polygons are facing inward on itself. And I grabbed, a quick castle texture and put it up, and I had to rotate that 90 degrees counterclockwise so that it would display properly on the inside of the cylinder. And I basically then just created two scripts. One that moves the camera left and right using transform.translate, and it's moving about on its x-axis. And what it basically has is a max distance or a magnitude of motion that it will undergo. And when it hits that cap, it negates the speed. And there's a speed that you can set in the editor for how quickly it will move. And of course, it also moves by time.delta time. So the angular velocity of the cylinder is controlled in a very similar manner. It has a top speed that it can hit, a top angular velocity, if you will. And when it hits that, what we do is we negate in this case though, the acceleration. So the camera, you can see, has a steady velocity. It's just moving at one velocity left, and then it just goes left and right. So we negate that speed every time it hits the magnitude of distance that we want it to hit. The cylinder, on the other hand, is a little more complicated. As you can see, it sort of speeds up, which you also see in the original Super Castlevania IV video there. So it starts at one speed and starts going faster and faster and faster, and then it slows down, and then it rolls back the other way. So basically, two scripts control that. We've got one for the rotation on the cylinder, one for the motion on the camera. And I did start prototyping this using per pixel operations, but I write software all day, and that is really where I put my time. I did not have time to sit down as of yet and complete that. It's something that I do want to revisit later, because I want to recreate this scene and sort of get into the real nitty-gritty of it on the lowest level possible. And of course, that original version, they did not have the option of importing a cylinder and just throwing a texture on it to create the effect. So this is my first prototype, and of course, prototyping is a great way to sort of get a lay of the land. Some of the things I wasn't thinking about when I was just thinking about the per pixel operations or writing a shader maybe for this effect, I wasn't thinking about having the platforms in the foreground and how important that is to see that parallax scrolling with the background in the foreground to create the feeling of depth. And I wasn't thinking about so much the acceleration of the cylinder or the motion of the camera, how I would set this up. So this was a really quick demo that I set up, but I definitely learned a lot by doing it. And of course, sometimes as a developer, you can really run yourself ragged with analysis paralysis, thinking about the perfect way something should be. And the truth is that a lot of times there is value in putting something together quick, getting the lay of the land, and going from there. So here's my first prototype on this. Let's get techie with it. I've been infatuated with this background for, trying to think, almost 20 years. Of course, this is, I think, like 17 years ago that I got this, and it's still fascinating to me. I'm super impressed that they did this with, they didn't, like I said, they didn't have the luxury of the tools that we have today, and yet they created this effect that I think is still really, really captivating. So glad I was able to bring that and check that out. Now, what I want to do is, of course, jump into the news and see here. Of course, as we saw in the opening of this evening's episode, Reggie Fils-Aime received this Lifetime Achievement Award and was inducted into the Video Game Hall of Fame. He gave a great speech. Of course, he's a very kind and gracious person. I think that's something that you could pretty much observe just from, the various videos that he's done over the past 14 or 15 years. And to tell you the truth, I have some personal experience with Reggie, and he treated me with nothing but respect, was extremely gracious, extremely helpful, and so my personal experience with the man, has been great. He helped us a little bit approaching Nintendo with SwapFire 2. In case you don't know, we ran a Kickstarter. Midnight Status ran a Kickstarter for that back in 2017 after completing and shipping SwapFire for the Wii U. And we've been on hold ever since then. That was a successful Kickstarter, and obviously there are a lot of games on the Switch now. We are still waiting our turn to get on there. But regardless of how that's all gone for us, Reggie was nothing but kind and helpful in that pursuit. And so I have this personal experience with him. And I think there is actually another local entrepreneur that Reggie has been helping a little bit. And I don't want to give away who that is, but it's somebody that would be great to have on a future episode of the show. And so, we'll see if we can make that happen. And, I think Reggie is somebody that's going to continue to be a force in the video game industry and elsewhere now that he's retired from Nintendo. And so it'll be interesting to see what his future endeavors are. Now, I don't have that much news today, to tell you the truth, and this is going to be probably the shortest episode of the PixelCast yet. This is the 6th episode, of course. We're in this a month and a half already. It's incredible. I have been enjoying doing the show. I hope that you have been enjoying the show, and will continue to, come back, listen, or watch. Share it with your friends, please. This is, I think, this mission that we have of growing through love of games is so important, and hopefully it's something that is useful to players that are thinking about becoming developers, and hopefully it's helpful to developers that have been doing this for 20 plus years like myself. Now, the first headline, this is actually pulled from GameIndustry.biz, and I think the previous headline was from Nintendo Life. So I've got some headlines from a couple of different news sources this week, trying it out, looking, just looking around and seeing what else is out there. So this headline is Acquisition and Conversion Costs Threaten a Mobile Bust. Of course, in episode 1 or 2, I'm trying to remember which it was, I did mention that mobile is still a great place if you want to go dip your toe in. It's very easy for you to create a game on that platform and, tell the people that you know about it. They can usually access it because everybody's got a smartphone now. Unfortunately, the cost of acquiring new players in the mobile space, as it relates to the ability to convert those players to paying customers, has reached a threshold that it may threaten a mobile bust. I saw the writing on the wall for this back in 2012 or 13. The last mobile game that I delivered was 2014, and around that time, say 2012, is really when I started looking for other things to do, because I could see that this was coming. The race to the bottom had created the in-app purchase model and the ads, and the mobile market shifted dramatically from 2008 to 2012, 13, 14 when I got out of it. And I think this was just readily apparent that if you hadn't raised a ton of money or already made a ton of money, that it was going to be very difficult to compete. And, of course, there are people who have made billions of dollars in this market, so it worked out very well for them. But as with all things, there is a cycle to it, and it looks like this mobile cycle may be coming to an end and may end up busting. Now, of course, we have spoken about Apple Arcade on several of the episodes prior to this. That seems to be an answer that Apple has put forth to say, hey, maybe we can fix this. Obviously, the creation of that, it's probably more than just something that is subjective where somebody said, hey, we want to have these high quality games. They can probably see in their analytics that this mobile boom is coming to an end. And so they've created that. Now, I've brought this to the attention of a few people who have been thinking about getting into mobile. And as I said on the show before, I think that the kingmaker phase of mobile is way over. I think possibly the big capitalization phase of this is starting to slow down and people are starting to shift their attention elsewhere. So definitely, if you're thinking about making mobile games, this is something to pay attention to. You might want to shift your efforts onto a new, more emerging platform, something like Brave or maybe the Oculus Quest. And I think there are a couple of other emerging platforms, maybe streaming getting into that space. So just be forewarned that this space is maybe slowing down a little bit. Okay, and this is the news that I wanted to speak about today. That is something that I think means a lot to me, in the sense that John Kirby, who recently passed away at 79, is the man who saved Donkey Kong. And his story, along with Howard Lincoln and Minoru Arakawa, is chronicled in the book Game Over. I'm going to put that up here real quick. This is a book that I read at least 5 times in my 20s when I really started sinking my teeth into game development. I read this book religiously, essentially. And as you can see at the top, it says the Bible of the interactive gaming industry. Now, there are several other great books that chronicle the gaming industry that I have read, but this is the one that I think affected me the most. There are so many good stories in this book. Not only is there this story of the lawsuit that Universal brought against Nintendo with regard to Donkey Kong and what they claimed was copyright infringement on King Kong, but the founding of Tetris and how it was discovered and brought out of the Soviet Union to the rest of the world is in this book. The story about Atari and Nolan Bushnell is in this book. The story of how Nintendo and its 100-year history all unfolded are in this book. I could go on and on covering all of the various anecdotes that are in this book. It is, I think, still truly an incredible book. It is something that I wish they would make a movie out of several, maybe the book or several of the stories in the book, because it was that entertaining to me. I don't know if that's everybody else, but this was extremely entertaining to me. Now, I want to go back here to John Kirby and talk a little bit about Donkey Kong. As you can see there, we've switched the background now, not talking about Castlevania anymore, but this story was very interesting. Essentially, Universal came to Nintendo after Nintendo had released this arcade game. And Nintendo was starting to generate some revenue. I think Nintendo had generated $100 million on Donkey Kong arcade sales at this time. They were running their office out of Seattle. And of course, we know that Mario was named after the landlord there. So they were receiving these arcade games, doing distribution, getting these things out there. It looks like Nintendo's really taking off. Well, Universal noticed this and said, you know what? We're going to bring a lawsuit against Nintendo. And the lawyer at Universal, his name escapes me at this moment, but he called it, I think, the Litigation Profit Center. So they viewed their litigation as just another business wing for the company, and they came after Nintendo with guns blazing, telling these guys that they, Howard Lincoln and Minoru Arakawa, that they don't stand a chance. Listen, Universal owns this copyright. They want to stop Donkey Kong, and essentially this could have been the end of Nintendo. Well, as it turns out, Howard Lincoln astutely said, listen, I'm not going to buy the Brooklyn Bridge. Universal is going to have to prove to me that they own the rights to King Kong. And of course, all of the lawyers, I think, at the time for Universal thought that Howard Lincoln was crazy. And perhaps it was even John Kirby who suggested this. I'm not sure if my memory serves me properly from the book. It was Howard Lincoln who put the burden of proof onto Universal. But of course, it was John Kirby who had to execute this legally in the courtroom, and he was successful. It is possible that if he was unsuccessful, that the Nintendo we know and love today, at least here in the United States, may not exist, and maybe Nintendo would no longer exist, period. So this is a story that affected me a great deal early on as I read about this, and it was essentially, it's like a great courtroom drama or, boardroom drama. And of course, we're so thankful for John Kirby and all he did there. As a Nintendo fan, I am sure that he did a number of other great things in his life. Of course, this is the one that I am, most aware of. And, he lived to 79. So if you looked at our episode last week, we spoke about life expectancy for game developers and what that's looking like, looking at the obituaries on Gamasutra for the past 14 or 15 years. So I don't want to go back really into that subject this week, trying to keep it upbeat and positive. But, it looks like Mr. Kirby here, lived a good long life and made some great contributions. So thankful for all that he did. And if you haven't checked out, Game Over, by all means, give this book a read. And I've got one other little anecdote which I find, very interesting. So Kirby, the pink character seen here, everybody knows and loves Kirby. If you haven't seen him in his game, you've probably seen him in Smash Brothers. So he is actually named after John Kirby. And that is something that I did not know until this week when I started reading these headlines. And of course, I was saddened to hear of this loss. And of course, hope his friends and family and community are all holding up well in light of this news. Again, we're just very thankful. And of course, it looks like Nintendo was eternally thankful for all that he did for the company. And, so we see Kirby here in the background. So, as I said a little earlier, this is going to be probably the shortest episode of the PixelCast. Yes, this is the 6th episode, and I just want to wrap the show up now with a little update on PixelFest, on the festival, and how we are looking for 2020. I had a great phone call today, and I'm happy to report that the anchor, where the festival will be anchored, has been secured. It's going to be great. I'm so excited about it. I'm so excited to have the partners that we are working with. And I want to divulge all these details. The date is selected, the initial partners are selected, and, the general setup. This is all, done and planned. And so, gosh, I just want to let it all out and tell you all about it, but it's still a little early. And so I can't divulge those details, but just know now that a date has been selected. It is going to be a great day to do the event, and we have our anchor partners who have agreed to work with us to make this a reality. And I'm so excited to bring on more partners and more people to hopefully make this the biggest and best Pixel Fest that we have ever had. Of course, 2017 is the year to beat. That is the year that we put the event on for 5 days. We went Wednesday to Sunday. Our game jam was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Our main event ran Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we had 5,429 attendees that year. So I think it's going to be a feat if we are able to eclipse that, but I am hopeful that we can, and I'm just looking forward to getting all this great content, packed in and to create, the best party that we've had yet. So we are here at 24 minutes, coming up on 25 minutes, and, I'm sorry for the short episode. If you enjoyed the long episodes, we are going to be returning, I think, to a longer format in future episodes. I think a lot of it really depends on what the news is. I spend a lot of time talking about the news, analyzing the news. This week, I was really moved to cover the John Kirby story that, as I said, this is something that I read about when I was younger, and it was something that really moved me, and I just really wanted to more or less focus on that and not get too into the weeds on the news this week. And of course, I'm glad that we got to cover a little Let's Get Techy with Castlevania IV. that is something that we will revisit in greater detail and look at per pixel operations to do the same effect, which I think will be really neat to do. So with all of that, I want to say good evening to you. And of course, as always, let's continue growing through love of games. I'm Jeremy Alessi, founder of PixelFest, and thank you again so much for being with us. Good night.